This is Nikki in Niagara coming to you from Niagara Falls, Canada. And this is my reading wrap-up for January of 2022. So while I tell you about the books I read in January, I will be coloring. And I am working in Clover Mandalas by Camellia Angelkova. This is one of my 10 books to finish this year. And this is the one that I'm working on. I have randomly picked out, well, first of all I chose a green, which was this one. Then I randomly picked out 3 more markers, and I randomly picked out a gel pen. So we have 2 greens and 2 blues, and the gel pen is kind of like a mossy green, so we're definitely going to have some green in this one. Whoops. So let's start the month off with a reread. I read 1984. Now, I read this book once before, and that was actually in 1984. It was my high school English class book, one of the books that we had to read that year. And I remember liking it when I read it, but the only thing I could remember about it was the rat scene. So when I read it this time, I really did not like it. I found it really boring. I found that the premise was not believable. I don't think the scenario would ever happen because of today's society, but I do think it would have been a possibility of back in 1948 when the book was written. So I can imagine the effect that it had on the people back then. So yeah, I found it really boring, and all I did was kept waiting for the rat scene to come up, but it didn't come up until nearly the end of the book. So, and it wasn't as powerful as I had remembered it being. So yeah, quite a difference between reading the book now at age 50 or so and having read it when I was like about 15. 16. So yeah, that's all we're going to say about that. The next book that I read was a graphic novel, and I hadn't read this one before, so I picked it up. And I don't read Marvel comics, and I don't watch the movies, so I don't know anything about ManThing. Just that he's kind of like, what's his name in DC? Swamp? No. I can't remember what the equivalent's name is in DC. I read DC comics. So yeah, it was okay. It's written by R.L. Stine, so that's what made me want to read this. So what it's about is that ManThing is a contributing member of society. He can talk and all that sort of thing, and he's working in Hollywood and TV and movies and stuff. But he needs to become his real self again, where he was more violent and goes back to the swamp, and he notices that things are different there, such as huge alligators. There are vultures in the swamp, and birds spontaneously explode. So he goes to Old Father to ask him to help him put the world back in order. But he finds him missing, and so he needs to find him. So he goes into what is called the nexus of all realities to find him. So it's a fun story. It's humorous, and it has a bit of of bloody violence. But the best part is at the back of the book there are Chamber of Chills short stories, which are more along, they don't have anything to do with ManThing. They are just like kind of creepy little stories, so I enjoyed that the best. So I gave it 3 stars, and I'm not going to be keeping this for my collection. I should have said that 1984 I gave 2 stars. So the next book I read was another graphic novel. This time it is Robusters, The Disaster Squad of Distinction by Pat Mills. And this is published by 2000 AD. This was a reread, deciding if I was going to keep it for my collection, and I've decided I am going to keep it. I gave it 5 stars. It's really, really good. It's about a bunch of old, out-of-date robots that have been gathered together to become a disaster unit, doing work from that disasters caused, you know, some sort of breaking up something, or, you know, causing a disaster area, and it's not safe for humans to go into, so these robots go in. So it's a collection of little mini-series that were previously published in the 2000 AD magazine, and so it's just about their adventures, and I really enjoy Rojaws and Hammerstein. But really, my favorite is Hammerstein, and that's not him. But yeah, so it's a fun sci-fi book with a feel-good atmosphere. And 2000 AD graphic novels aren't exactly that easy to come by. Even I've been looking to see what the new stuff out is on Amazon, and you know, they're not exactly the easiest thing to come by. So definitely keeping that for my collection. Now, next thing I read was I went back to an ebook. I alternate between physical book and ebook. Unless I read something small like a graphic novel, then I'll read 2 of them. So I read the next book, which I think is book 4 in the Bubble series by Jason Werbeloff. And this one was called Manufacturing Margaret, the Cybernetic Dream. So this is the first book in the series that didn't actually wow me. It kind of felt like it was the main character has changed. Our story kind of ended with Daniel in the last book. So what was I saying? So yeah, now we're introducing Margaret as the main character. We already know her from the previous books, and it just kind of feels like this book is a setup, setting up the story with Margaret as the main character. So let's read what I put. It's the 4th book. It is the beginning of the story after the first trilogy, the first 3 books. Margaret's now the main character, and now that Margaret's the main character, so far in the book I haven't liked Margaret. She was a pain in the butt. After reading this one, I'm still not too crazy about her, but I'm willing to go the run with her as our main character. The book also changes the setting, and this all sets up the next book without really having any, the book doesn't really have any major plot or resolution. So it was an okay read, and I sat down and read it in one reading, and I hope the next book will be better. I gave this 3 stars. So then, the next book that I read was The Silence of Ghosts by Jonathan Aycliffe. So, at first look, I'm not exactly remembering this book, so let's take a look at the write-up. I gave it 3 stars. A slow, haunting Gothic ghost story. A man enters the abandoned family home after his father's death and then finds his grandfather's diary. The book is told through these entries and relays the story of the house, a gentle, atmospheric ghost story. And I cannot remember a thing about this book. That doesn't tell me anything. Go into trying to figure out what it is about. It's just a book that didn't really stay with me, but it was a decent enough read while I read it. So probably will not be keeping that. The next book that I read was The Gunslinger by Stephen King. Now this was a reread for me. I read it originally when it came out, and back in 2007 I started a reading Stephen King in chronological order challenge, and I skipped over The Gunslinger when I came to it because the first 3 books in the series kind of all came out at The Gunslinger came out first, and then the next 2 books came out kind of in a row, and The Gunslinger was updated. So that's what I read, was the updated version of The Gunslinger, and I decided to read these 3 books in a row when I got to when this happened. So let me read what I wrote, because it'll be more intelligent than what I can come up with out of my head. So King ventures into the fantasy genre once again. So far I don't really like his fantasy. There was Eyes of a Dragon, the book with Peter Straub, and oh, I'm sure there's something else. I just pulled off the thing off the pen. Oh well. This time he begins his magnum opus, the Dark Tower series, a Western fantasy. So I read this originally back in 1982 and had a few images in my mind, which I've since realized are not in this first book. What I remember is a black woman in a wheelchair and something about a train. So neither of those things happen in this book. They happen in either the second or the third one, because those will be rereads for me too. This is a simple quest book. A man journeys through tough terrain, retains a companion, and has a few stops on that journey. He reaches his destination at the end and is sent in the direction his quest will continue on in the next book. It's well written. The atmosphere is lyrical, even though the writing isn't. A slow burn that leaves one interested in the next book to come. So basically it's just the adventures of he's a gunslinger. It's a western world full of desert and little western towns with sheriffs and such, and he has some runs-in with people and stuff, and yeah, I mean, it's good. It's not terribly rememberable or anything, but it's a good setup for a series, so I gave it a 4. Then the next book I read was Cast a Cold Eye by Alan Ryan. Now this one I did for a challenge, so just let me find it. I've got 2 places left to check. Here we are. So this was for the book from an independent press. And let me read what I wrote about this. An American writer, Jack, comes to a small rural village. I have such a hard time saying that word. In Ireland to research his next book. Once there, he starts seeing strange, realistic apparitions. Something out of the normal is happening here, and the local priest is involved. Father Henning knows more than he'll say, and Jack thinks he's being pulled into it. Very atmospheric and heavy, some creepy and disturbing scenes, a slow burn. So, this is another one that I don't really remember too much. Is this the one about the island? No, it's not. Isn't that terrible when you can't really remember a book? I gave it 5 stars, too. So I guess it's a book I'm going to need to reread to put it back into my mind. I can't remember if this is one about the island. No, it's not. Well, anyways, it was a good book if I could remember it. Oh dear. The next one is Venus in a Blind Spot, and that again I did for a challenge, which was to read a book by an author from a different continent. So I read Venus in the Blind Spot by Junji Ito, who is Japanese. So this is a short story collection like most of his books, and this is one of the best ones that there is out there. Every single story is creepy and unsettling. There are also several body horror themed stories, which is what Junji Ito is most well known for, and we can see that the master is at work here. This would also be a good book to start with if you've never read Junji Ito. So I won't tell you about the stories because they're short, and it's best to just go into this not knowing what's going to happen. So the artwork is his usual brilliance. Maybe if we can find something that's really, yeah, I'm remembering these. So these are really good, and you can see the artwork is just wonderful. Got some color pages. I like his black and white better though, because it's more creepy. And this is really creepy. That one. So yeah, this is a really good book. I really recommend this one. If you're an Ito fan, then you'll find it one of the better short story collections, and if you're a newbie, it's a great book to start with. So the next book I read was another challenge. I was trying to use up all the challenge spaces. So the next one I read on an ebook, and it is called Bone Gap by Laura Ruby. Now this is a young adult title, and that was the challenge, was to read a young adult title. They gave 5 suggestions in my book. See, here are the suggestions, and this book was a suggestion. It's a story about well, it takes place in, like, I can't remember where it takes place, but it's somewhere like Appalachia, where there's like poor white people, basically, is that kind of an area in the mountains. So it's young adult, but the the main character is 18, so it's doesn't really feel young adultish, and it was really, really good. Really enjoyed it. Gave it 5 stars. 18-year-old Finn witnesses the abduction of Rosa, but because of his inability to recognize faces, so he has that dysmographobia, or whatever it's called, when you can't recognize faces. That was a theme in a book published recently. This one was published in 2015. So he doesn't know who it was who did it, because he can't tell what the face is. So the book explores the issue of trust within relationships and enters into the world of magic or the supernatural. A brilliant, thought-provoking young adult, though it reads like an adult. So, anyways, the case was never solved. They kept searching, but they never found anything. So the case went cold, and now that he's older, it's all about trying to find out who it was that did it. So it's kind of like a mystery thriller type of thing. So really good book. Highly recommend that. So then the next book I read was, oh, I've lost where I am now. I was trying to keep it open. Here we are. Next book I read was, come on, Just Married by Kirsten Maudglin. So her books are really hard to remember because they're all these really twisty and turny thrillers, short novella thrillers. So they're hard to remember what they are until you start reading them again. So here's what I wrote for this one. Just a minute, I'm going to sneeze. Okay, so Grace and Ryan take a belated honeymoon in a remote, secluded cottage surrounded by a forest. One has a secret that never can be told, while the other has a secret that must be told this week. The relationship between the two is a bit sickly at first, with Grace as a frightened, timid woman who needs protecting, with Adam being a physically fit man who worships Grace and must protect her from everything. But this changes pretty quick when the secrets begin outing and the twists start flying. A typical Maudglin, fast-paced, shocking twists thriller. So exactly what you expect when you're reading a Maudglin. And if you like thrillers, I highly recommend her books for just, a little shorty in between your longer books. So the next book was that I finished the short story book that I was reading at the time, and that was, I wrote it down for one of the tags. Here it is. Let's just keep this page where I am. So yeah, I read a short story every day of my life, basically. Hardly ever don't. So the book that I was currently reading was called Entropy Bloom, and it was a collection of stories by Jeremy Robert Johnson. And I gave this book a 5, which I hardly ever do with short story collections, because there's usually, some great ones, some okay ones, and there's always one or two duds. But not with this book. This book was, every single story was amazing. They range from slightly off to terrifying horror. I loved every story, and many gave me the serious creeps. The last story especially was ominous. I can already see this being a favorite collection of the year. So most definitely the first five-star collection I've read in a long time, and of course it was horror themed. And when books give me the creeps, then there's something extra special, because I don't get creeped very easily. So then, the next book that I read was a little bit different than what I usually read. This one is a kind of like a fantasy. I called it a dark fairy tale and said that it was haunting. Rose is a carer at a senior's home. She looks after Charlotte, who shows her one letter at a time of an increasingly dark family tale. After having a baby, Rose becomes obsessed with the tale, which becomes life and death to her. A lyrical modern fairy tale which uses the historical Cottingley fairies as a backdrop. So that's the time when it happens, that the letters happen. The letters are happening during the time of when people believed in fairies, and that whole movement with the Cottingley fairies that Arthur Conan Doyle made famous. So the story starts off as a slice of life of a woman who starts work as a carer for seniors. It grows dark and ever more menacing, with a heart-pounding race to a finish, which leaves the reader. Great book just a great, like, when the story wasn't in the dark phases, it was just a really well told, interesting story, and I gave this 5 stars. So it was a great month for me, and the 5 stars, I got quite a few of them out this month. So definitely recommend that one. You don't have to be into horror and all that other true crime and all that kind of stuff. This is definitely different from all that stuff that I read. So then the next book that I read, I should say I read 25 books in January. So the next book I read was a random book on my Kindle. It was called The Valentines Circle, and it was by Ronaldo Del Val. And it says that it's #1 in the Silas de Saint Michel detective series, but when I went to look at the author's books, this is the only book that he ever wrote, and it was really, really good. It's set in Victorian Boston, so it's a historical thriller, or more of a mystery than a thriller. So, but the murders are pretty gross. There's a series of murders happening where pregnant women are being murdered, and their babies are being removed from them, and the babies are killed. The women are tried to be saved, but they usually die, though not all of them do. Some of them are actually saved. So it's a gripping and entertaining mystery. The only problem that I had with the book was that the dialogue often was modern, such as using the phrase "you guys" quite a bit. So that kind of took you out of the historical setting when all of a sudden people started talking like modern day people and using modern slang. So yeah, that was a problem, and that's what made me give the book a 4 instead of a 5. The next book that I read was The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jules. This was my very first Lisa Jules book, and I won't say I hated it, but I thought it was boring. It was definitely not thrilling. So the plot was good, but I didn't like the way it was told. 5 children who were separated after living in the same abusive home are trying to find each other. The book was told in 3 points of view, which we are just dropped into, and it's hard to tell what is going on. Like, usually I love books that are told from different points of view, but often when a different person's starting to tell the story, you'll have the chapter titled, Bob, and then the next chapter will be called Joan, so you know who's talking. That didn't happen here, and you just start reading and go, oh, someone else is talking here. And then the problem is that there were a couple of names which were very similar. There was a Lucy and a Libby, so I had a really hard time telling which was which. Lucy would start talking and I'd start remembering Libby's story, and vice versa. So yeah, I didn't like that. And I couldn't get a rhythm going with the book, and I just found it a slow read. I did enjoy the cases, like the crime that was going on. So, yeah, it had a promising plot which was never brought to fruition. Overall, about 2.5 stars, but I rounded it up to a 3 for Goodreads. So yeah, it's a shame, because I really wanted to read Lisa Jules' books. I am going to give her another try. For some reason, her next book coming out is a sequel to this, and I think that's a dumb idea. I'm definitely not going to be reading that next. I'll pick up one of her other books, because people say that this is her worst book. So unfortunately, I just started reading her with her worst book. So then, the next book that I read, oops, just a minute, I'm missing my books. This was Entropy Bloom. This was the Cottingley Cuckoo. Well, look at that cover. Isn't it beautiful? I think so. And this is the family upstairs. So next we go back to an ebook, which was called Kith and Kill, and it was the 4th book in the Inspector Paul Amos series. Not a story that I will, not a series that I'll go back to. I gave this book 3 stars. So it's a typical British police procedural, and I like those. I really like British mysteries, thrillers, and I especially love police procedurals. So it was in the style of an Agatha Christie, so it was kind of a cozy-ish story. We have a family of 3 brothers and 3 sisters that they attend the father's will, and there's something a little off in the will. And immediately after they read the will, the eldest brother dies. So D.I. Amos must figure out which sibling is murdering off the men. So more brothers start to die. So he has to figure out who it was that is killing them. And then at the end of the story, it's a classic Christie trope where he gathers together all the possible suspects and tells them the story of what happened and who it was that the killer is. It's a decent enough story. You know, it's not my typical kind of read, but I enjoy that kind of thing. I gave it a C. Then the next book that I read was The Painting by Cheris Cotter. Now, she is a Canadian middle grade ghost story writer, and I really, really enjoyed the first book I read by her called The Swallow. So I decided I found one of her books for real cheap on Book Outlet, so I decided to read her again. And another book that I just absolutely really enjoyed. She writes really good ghost stories, and they're always nice and wholesome, you know, if you kind of like get my drift. So this is a lovely middle grade story of familial love between mother and daughter. Annie gets dizzy and falls into a picture. There she meets Claire, who needs help with her mother. Meanwhile, in Annie's world, her mom is in a coma, but Annie feels a deep, mysterious connection to Claire in the dream world that might save her own mother. Beautiful writing at this grade level. The 2 12-year-olds are fantastic real kids. I loved them both. The pacing is always on the go with an intense ending. What does that say? I don't know. So now I've read 2 of Cotter's middle grade ghost stories, and I'll certainly read her again. So she has one more book that I haven't read, and she has a new book coming out this year. So really glad to have found her. So the next book that I read was Fragments of Horror by Junji Ito. Again, this is a collection of short stories. I don't know where I put the review. It doesn't appear to be in here. I didn't read this one for a... Oh, here it is. It's up a few pages for some reason. So I'll just read what this one says, but first of all, let me show you the book. So I don't know if you can see, but it has an embossed design on the jacket. And that design is reprinted on the covers. So this is the pattern that's embossed onto the jacket. So it's a gorgeous, gorgeous looking book. And of course, like all his books, it starts off with a few. Oh no, it doesn't. It doesn't have any color pages in it. Usually there are a few. So this was his first book published by Viz Media, and it was his return to horror after an 8-year break. There's a note from this is my favorite story right here. I remembered this was a reread for me again, and I remembered a lot of the stories in here. This one's called Red Turtleneck. Yeah, that was my favorite by him. So I read this when it came out, and it hooked me on Junji Ito. So these are first-rate stories. Gorgeous illustrations with some really creepy body horror images. It's one of my favorites by Junji Ito. And of course a great place to start because it was the book that introduced the English-speaking world to Junji. So the next book that I read is called White Pines. Looks like I didn't even write... Oh yeah, there it is. That's where I am. Okay, White Pines is another book by Gemma Amor. Now this is the one... Oh no. Yeah, this is the one that... the Cast of a Cold Eye, I think it was called. I couldn't remember that one because it had a bit of the same plot as this one, and this is the one that I was remembering. So White Pines by Gemma Amor. I've read 2 of her other books and enjoyed them. They weren't 5-star reads for me, but they were good. Makes me want to read the rest of her stuff. So Megs receives keys to the house in the Highlands and on that she inherited, and on that day her husband comes home and says the marriage is over. That's it. He's in love with somebody else, and you know, she needs to get lost. So basically what she decides to do is she just takes off, decides she's going to go to that house. She packs up, she quickly packs up right there in front of his face and takes off to this house. So when she gets there, she finds the villagers are really weird and unwelcoming, and there is an island nearby which is calling out to her. She can feel the pull of this island coming to her. So this is, it has a folk tale feel to it. It was really enjoyable horror. And we could also call this a cosmic horror. So some people may not like it because of that, but I love cosmic horror, so I always find it really fun. So it's a good story, really good. So next, where are we? Next, I finished my next short story collection, and that's this one. The Pier Falls by Mark Haddon. So it's The Pier Falls and other stories. I haven't read Mark Haddon, but this book makes me want to read his other books. He's not horror or thriller or anything like that. These stories are, though. They're all unsettling, let's say, stories. A lot of short stories are, though. That's kind of the thing with short stories. They need to shake you up a little bit. These do a lot, though. Let's see what I read. Absolutely brilliant. A collection of longer than usual short stories. The stories sit well together as each is grim and dark. Wonderful lyrical writing with plots that capture you, taking you down a road with an unknown ending. The best collection of stories I've read in a long while. Truly excellent, and I gave it 5 stars. So I enjoyed this more than Entropy Bloom, which I gave 5 stars as well. So really, really going well with my short stories this in January. 2 5-star collections. That doesn't happen hardly at all. So yeah, these stories are long short stories, if you want to call them that. So there's less than usual. Usually there's 13. I don't know why it always turns out to 13, but usually there's 13 stories, and this one has about 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, it's got 9. And some of these stories took me 2 days to read. I would read half of it one day and then the other half the next day. So really good, and I'm definitely going to read his novels. He's got 3 of them out, I believe. So, the next book I read was A Love Like Blood by Marcus Sedgwick. This was the slightly used book that I got for the Abominable Book Club. And I had never heard of this author before, and unfortunately I didn't like the book. At this point I've read 9 books that the club has sent me, and I've enjoyed a lot, every book. The Cottingley Cuckoos was from them as well. So unfortunately I gave this one a 2. And let's just read what I said about it. I really don't know how to categorize this book, but I think thriller is as close as it gets. The plot is simple enough. During the war in France, our main character sees a man doing something repulsive. He can never get it out of his mind, feeling guilty at times. 20 years later, on a business trip, he decides to track this man down. And that starts his obsession of the chase. Running throughout the book is the theme of blood. A slow read, fine enough storytelling, but not an awful lot happens. So it's not a book that you want to put down, because it's the story, it's told well enough that you keep reading, but not much hardly happens. There's never any tension, and I found it rather boring. So I put not a bad book, but boring. So you take that with how you take it. The problem is that the back makes you think that this is a vampire book, and, well, there's a vampire, but he's hardly ever seen, so just let you know that in case you pick this up thinking you're going to read a vampire story. Technically it is, but not really. So the next book I read was an e-book, and this was the 3rd book in the, what is this series called? I forget what this series is called, but this is the 3rd book in it. It's called Dead Moon by Peter Clines, and this is cosmic horror. This was really exciting. All of the books in this series are. It's a fast, quick-paced read from start to finish. It's book 4, but shows no lessening of the excitement. Book 1 is still my favorite, though. The moon has become Earth's new burial ground and tourist destination. Then one day the dead awaken and it's zombie on the moon time. And really, that's all you need to have for this book is the tagline, Zombies on the Moon. And if that sounds exciting to you, then go ahead and read it, because I gave it 5 stars. I love zombie stories, and this is an excellent one, but it is cosmic horror. So then, the next book that I read was Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. So this is my 2nd book by him. My first one was the something chainsaw. And he keeps being touted as a horror writer, but I don't consider either of these books horror, especially this one. So I gave it a 3, and let's see what I wrote about it, because it's not really very memorable. It's hard to give a summary of this, and the one on the back is somewhat misleading. It's also difficult to pin a genre on it. I've gone with either gothic or noir. There is a stream of consciousness as a man goes back to when he's 12. What he tells is sketchy. We know some of what he describes as true, but how to tell what parts are true and which are the imaginings of a 12-year-old is hard. It is a sad story, as he thinks only of the dad who died when he was 4, and the dysfunctional childhood he and his sister had. It includes, oh no, not he and his sister. Is it just him and his brother? Or was there a sister? Anyways, I don't say. It just says dysfunctional childhood they had, which includes a younger brother with mental limitations. The book made me feel sad and melancholy, but I can't really tell you what happened. And basically, that's it. The synopsis on the back makes you think that it's about a house that is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And that's basically just, a mental image of what he has, because he's thinking of what went on in that house. The house isn't really bigger on the inside, so yeah, it's just there. I wouldn't ever read it again or recommend anybody read it. So that was this book. It's just a novella. I won't be keeping that. Then next I read a graphic novel. This is another 2000 AD book. It's The 10 Seconders, The American Dream. So let's just read the little bit that I wrote about it. The world is held hostage by the gods. This is about a resistance group. They are given the nickname 10 Seconders, as that's about as long as they live when they go up against a god. Really good, but I forgot it quickly. So yeah, all I remember is that they're battling the gods, and that it's really good. I gave it 4 stars, but it's just not a memorable story. And this was a reread as well, but reading it was like reading it for the first time. Then I decided it was time for me to read a classic, so I read The Vampire by John William Polidori. And this was written in 1819, and it happened on the same night as Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. It was when they were all around the fire, and they decided on a thunderous night, let's all go to our rooms and write a horror story. And so they all did, and only 2 of them, I believe, had any success with their books. Of course, Mary Shelley's book was more than success, and this book was a bit of something at the time that it came out, but I have absolutely nothing to say. Like, I like reading books from like the Victorian era, from like 1850 onwards. Books that are like from the 1800s and up are okay. Some of them are great to read, like Frankenstein is really easy, it's a breeze, but sometimes the language is difficult because it's not the way we talk now, and sometimes it's just really awkward and hard to read, and that was the problem with this book. And it was like so boring. There's a vampire in it, and he's getting women, and they just kind of tell the story, and the vampire is the bad guy. He does take women, and then after the story ends, it goes on some more and tells us, well, the situation that we're reading about ends, then it goes on and tells us the further life of the vampire. But I just wrote down awkward to read and boring, and I gave it 1 star. 1 star because I did read it. I didn't give up. I wanted to, and it's a novella as well. It has less than 100 pages, so yeah. Do not recommend that. You can keep it out of your classics. And I believe that is every book that I read in February. So I hope that you found something of interest here, and that you enjoyed this video. I got a bit of coloring done, but I always end up talking with my hands, so I don't color that much when I do one of these. But I really enjoyed telling you about the books that I read, and I hope that you enjoyed listening. So until next time, thank you so much for watching. Bye!